The gentleman from Loudon, Mr. May.
Sir, point of personal privilege, sir.
I'm sorry. She was.
Thank you,
I'd like
Mr.
to cut
Speaker.
you off.
In honor of Black History Month, we often remark upon and focus our attention on the marquee names of history: Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King. I think far too often we forget other giants, men and women who have had deep effects on all Americans' daily lives, but never get the popular recognition that they deserve. Today I'd like to focus on one such individual, hardly a household name, but a giant in the field of science and medicine, who confronted racism and has directly or indirectly touched the lives of all Americans. Dr. Charles Richard Drew was a longtime resident of Arlington and the area that has become the 49th District. Born in 1904 in Washington, D.C., his parents worked hard to make sure that their son was educated in D.C. and not the segregated schools of Arlington. In his youth, he seemed headed for a career in athletics and coaching rather than medicine. He lettered in 4 sports at Dunbar High School. He was given a scholarship to study at Amherst College, where he was a star athlete, All-American halfback, and captain of his Amherst College football team. After graduation, Charles Drew was a coach and biology and chemistry instructor at Morgan State College in Baltimore, Maryland. But a turning point in his life was at hand. He wanted to become a doctor. Even with the exceptional grades and recommendations he had, the segregation of the day stood in the way of his dream. He resigned his job at Morgan State and went to Montreal, Canada, where he was accepted and enrolled in McGill University's medical school, the top program in Canada at the time. There he was granted 2 fellowships, was awarded his MD and Master of Surgery degrees, graduating second in a class of 127 students. For 2 years following graduation, Dr. Drew was an intern and resident in Montreal hospitals. In 1935, he returned to the United States to accept an appointment as instructor in pathology at the College of Medicine of Howard University in Washington, D.C. During the next 2 years, he advanced to become assistant professor of surgery. Dr. Drew showed such promise in his work at Howard that in 1938, at a time when war clouds were gathering over Europe, he was recommended for one of the Rockefeller Fellowships at Columbia University, aimed at promoting advanced training in all fields of medicine. Dr. Drew earned his doctorate in medical science from Columbia in 1940, becoming the first African American to do so, with a doctoral thesis titled Banked Blood, a study in blood preservation. You know, in the late 30s, it had only recently been discovered that people had different blood types, A, B, or O. A transfusion of the right type of blood could save a person's life. However, blood was perishable. It would only keep for about a week. In his research, Dr. Drew found a way to store blood much longer by using only part of the blood called plasma. The use of dried plasma later made transfusions even more widely available. As a part of his thesis, he theorized that blood plasma could replace whole blood in transfusions because of its longer shelf life. Around the time of his graduation, Drew received an urgent cable from a former professor who had returned to England. Thousands of men and women and children were in desperate need of blood transfusions and plasma as a result of the daily bombing of the cities in England by the German forces. The cable requested 5,000 glass containers of dried plasma for transfusions, plus the same amount 3 weeks later. Dr. Drew developed and organized a large project in August 1940 to collect blood in New York City hospitals for the export of plasma to Britain. He was to collect, test, and transport large quantities of blood plasma for distribution. Dr. Drew continued to organize and was appointed medical supervisor of the Plasma for Britain project. This was the world's first blood bank, as we know them today. Using techniques he developed as a part of his research, he transformed the test tube methods of blood researchers into the first successful mass production techniques. Just 36 years old, his system for the storing of blood plasma literally revolutionized the medical profession. By January 1941, Drew's efforts and techniques proved so successful that Britain no longer needed American blood. By this time, it had become apparent that America probably would be drawn into the war. Military authorities in the United States were concerned about the need for a stockpile of blood reserves if hostilities began. Dr. Drew had emerged as the leading authority on mass transfusion and processing methods. After discussions with medical leaders and the American Red Cross, the government asked the Red Cross to establish a pilot program similar to the Plasma for Britain project. Charles Drew organized and was named director of the first Red Cross blood bank. He was also named assistant director of the National Research Council in charge of blood collection for the entire United States Army and United States Navy. The center began operation in February of 1941. The innovations he developed enabled medics in the Pacific and European theaters to save lives of tens of thousands of Allied soldiers and sailors. Dr. Drew was instrumental in developing blood plasma processing and transfusion therapy. He also greatly improved the methods of blood storage. Simply put, his work with the Red Cross Blood Program during World War II laid the foundation for modern-day blood banking. However, owing to the racism of the day, Dr. Drew had to resign his position as director in protest against Red Cross and military edicts soon after the system was put in place, ordering that all blood supplies be separated by race. Let me repeat that. All blood supplies had to be separated by race. He voiced his displeasure at the waste of resources, at the waste of manpower, and the sheer boneheaded bigotry of these requirements. Dr. Drew, after putting in place the two largest and first blood banks that helped save tens of thousands of lives in World War II, resigned his position and returned to Howard University, where he was appointed to several scientific committees and received honorary degrees for his efforts in teaching surgery to new African-American surgeons. He was one of the first African-American surgeons, or African-Americans, to be selected for membership on the American Board of Surgery. In fact, in 1943, he was the first black surgeon to serve as an examiner on the American Board of Surgery. By the war's end, millions of donations had been received by the Red Cross, donations that made possible the saving of thousands of lives of wounded U.S. servicemen, lives that would have been lost in earlier wars when blood therapy was unknown. Mankind suffered a great loss in 1950, when at the age of 45, just 45, Dr. Drew was killed in an automobile accident while driving to a scientific conference. His pioneering medical work and development of the blood plasma bank, giving a second chance of life to millions, has endured. Indeed, how many lives have been saved because of his genius at turning basic biological research into practical production methods? It's a certainty that mankind owes a huge debt of gratitude to Charles Richard Drew. Today, I ask that we honor the memory of a groundbreaking physician, surgeon, and pioneering medical researcher, a proud Arlingtonian, a Knox community resident, and Virginian, Dr. Charles R. Drew.